There is no evidence, has been the GOP party line on the question of possible collusion between Donald Trump's campaign and Russia. But last Thursday, the Wall Street Journal offered the strongest evidence yet that there is reason to continue pursuing that big question. Wall Street Journal reporter Shane Harris wrote about his conversation with now deceased Republican operative Peter Smith, who sought to obtain emails he believed were stolen from Hillary Clinton's email server by Russian hackers. According to Harris's report, Smith suggested to associates and in emails that former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn was an ally in his search for Clinton's emails. Another Journal story revealed that Smith listed top names from the Trump campaign, including Steve Bannon and Kellyanne Conway, in a recruiting document while seeking the emails. There is no evidence, according to the story, that Smith sought or received coordination from them, and Bannon and Conway denied any contacts with Smith during the campaign. A former Trump campaign official also told the Journal that if Flynn worked with Peter Smith, it would have been in his capacity as a private individual. But in a lengthy post in the Lawfare blog, cyber expert Matt Tate claims that Smith approached him last summer to verify the veracity of emails offered to him by a mysterious source. And Tate reached this conclusion following weeks of interactions with Smith, quote, "The combination of Smith's deep knowledge of the inner workings of the campaign, this document naming him in the Trump campaign group, and the multiple references to needing to avoid campaign reporting suggested to me that the group was formed with the blessing of the Trump campaign." Back with me, David Korn, Nayyera, and Malcolm Nance. And joining me now is that reporter who broke this story, Shane Harris, senior writer for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you all very much for being here. Shane, let me start with you. How'd this come about? Tell us a little bit more about Peter Smith.
Right. Well, actually, I found out about Peter Smith from Matt Tate, who you mentioned in the Lawfare blog post, who identified himself as someone who was talking to me about this. And he described the story very much as he wrote it in that essay, that he'd been contacted by this man, Peter Smith, who was portraying himself as having these alliances with the Trump campaign and wanted Matt's help in this effort to find Hillary Clinton's hacked emails, what Peter Smith believed were her hacked emails. So in the course of looking into that, Peter Smith actually learned that I was reporting on this story, and he contacted me, and we had a fairly lengthy interview in early May in which he laid out pretty much the entire operation, which corresponded very closely to what Matt had described. We then engaged in subsequent reporting and planned to go back to Mr. Smith with even more questions, but he passed away about 10 days after that initial interview, so we were never able to follow up with him directly, but did continue interviewing some of his associates and looking at some of the material that he'd been sending around to recruit people and to describe his effort, in which he did in fact call out Trump associates.
Hey, Shane, let me play some sound from then candidate Donald Trump on July 26th and ask you about it on the other side.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
Shane, where does that comment from Donald Trump fit into the story that you've written and what Matt Tate wrote about on the Lawfare blog?
Well, I think that comment, which comes in July 27th, actually follows on the heels of some conversation that had been going on, particularly, I think, among conservative activists, as I would describe them, like Peter Smith, about the possibility that these emails might be obtained. But we had never seen Donald Trump talking about that openly, and certainly not exhorting Russia to go out and to find those emails. And it is about 5 weeks after that Peter Smith actually formally sets up a company to go out and try and collect this information and pay people under the auspices of a company that he formed in Delaware, as he said, to avoid campaign finance expenditure reporting. So it falls right squarely in the middle of this conversation that is brewing in the summer among conservative activists. Donald Trump's comments occur, and then 5 weeks later, Peter Smith is formally engaged in this process that he had essentially been kicking around with associates prior to that time.
And one last question for you on all of this, Shane. Matt Tate, if I remember correctly, in his Lawfare blog, he was very concerned about these conversations he was having with Peter Smith, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. And in fact, we should make clear that Matt Tate never intended to join Peter Smith in this effort, nor thought that it was particularly well advised. And ultimately, he backed out of it when Peter Smith asked him to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And it was clear to Matt that this was engaged in some way that appeared to be, in his mind, coordinated with the campaign, but also trying to skirt campaign finance. So Peter Smith may have misread Matt when he reached out to him, thinking that he would be an ally in this cause.
David, you're someone, a reporter at the table who's you've been reporting a lot on the Russia story. What do you make of this gigantic piece in this very big puzzle?
Well, first I have to congratulate Shane and say I was very jealous when I read the story. Just a great piece of work, Shane.
Thanks,
and
David.
I want to make one point that, this gets to some possibility of collusion, at least between Michael Flynn and someone who was trying to make contact with Russians who he supposed had these Hillary emails. It was more a theory than anything else. But there is this one paragraph in Shane's piece in which he cites anonymous sources saying that intelligence intercepts picked up conversations with Russian hackers about how they could get information to Michael Flynn if they had something. And it may or may not be related to the Peter Smith operation, but I found that absolutely fascinating because yet again, it points back to Flynn, and we know that before the election, Flynn was also in contact with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the United States. We don't know what those conversations were about, but again and again and again, we have these pathways back to Flynn, while it's known publicly that the Russians are probably the ones behind the DNC hacks and then the WikiLeaks release of that material.
Hey, Nayyera, in the statement from the campaign where they say, if Michael Flynn was doing this thing, it was in his personal capacity. Is it even possible to separate your personal capacity from a presidential campaign when you're operating at that high a level?
And that is part of the challenge. There's always been a understanding, one of the technical legal terms of there is a personal activity, then there's official government activity, but usually you hear that as a separation between government and personal. Campaigns are inherently personal, particularly at that high a level. And we see this all play out in how Flynn and several Trump associates neglected to declare on their security clearance forms who they've had meetings with. So that those can no longer be personal conversations when you're trying to go for that highest job in national security and a security clearance. Everything that you've done in the course of the campaign matters. And again, for a family that really seems to value their public image and perception, did a really terrible job of managing the perception being reality. A lot of these meetings and a lot of these activities were better off being undone.
Malcolm, before I come to you, since we're now talking about him, Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor to President Trump, let's hear what he had to say at the Republican convention when Donald Trump was being anointed the Republican presidential nominee.
We do not need a reckless president who believes she is above the law. Lock her up. That's right. That's right. Lock her up. She put our nation's security at extremely high risk with her careless use of a private email server.
Malcolm, why shouldn't we think that Flynn himself was being reckless or careless in his contacts, whether personal or through the campaign, allegedly, with Russians?
Well, you should. And as a matter of fact, as you played that clip, my first thought was, this is exactly what someone should play at the sentencing hearing. That exact,
you just
piece of
jumped
audio.
right on.
Well, Michael Flynn is a tier 1 target in this investigation on the basis of everything that we're learning in public sources. The Inspector General of the Defense Department is investigating his finances. Director Mueller is investigating his links to Kislyak and others in Turkey. You have a national counterintelligence spy hunting team going after his links to possibly a GRU and other intelligence agencies. Peter Smith, in relation to Mike Flynn, is a tier 3 person. Roger Stone being the second tier there. There were obviously multiple dirty tricks teams who were there trying to coordinate this information. And I happen to know, because I wrote about it in my book, Plot to Hack America, the genesis of this story came from Russia in March of 2016, and it came to Fox News through Judge Napolitano, where they claimed that they had the inner workings of the Kremlin were debating releasing Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. By July, it had turned into an obsession, obviously, on the basis of Trump's statement. So Michael Flynn himself, he's got other issues. If I was him, I would be worrying about that potential lawsuit, indictment on attempting to abduct an American resident from Pennsylvania. And I wouldn't worry about being locked up on, minor political charges. He has issues.
Yeah, he has issues, and we don't have any time to go into the rest of that. But thank you to David Corn and Nayyera Hack. Malcolm Nance and Shane Harris will be back in our next hour. But coming up